Okay, we're live. All right, thank you everybody for joining us. This is the second Curebase webinar where we're going to be going through a series of different perspectives and learnings on decentralized clinical trials. Today we're going to be learning from IntegReview IRB about the IRB's perspective on recent changes and where decentralized clinical research is going. And we're joined by amazing guests. This is Melanie Flores, the president of IntegReview IRB. So I'll let her give a quick introduction to herself before we dive into it.
Yes, hi everyone. I am Melanie Flores, and I have just taken over a new role as president of IntegReview. My previous role was the vice president of compliance, so I have a high regulatory background, working in a lot of IRB training, and then of course the regulatory compliance aspect of review. I oversee our AHARP accreditation and all of the, basically our whole HRPP, our Human Research Protection Program, and I work with board and staff members in ensuring that they have plenty of education and engaged in everything that we do here at IntegReview. Very nice to meet you all.
Absolutely. So I guess to start, obviously there's been a lot of changes in the realities of clinical research right now in COVID-19. Site-based research is fairly disrupted, and a lot of folks are changing their research plans. So how have you seen the requests from your client base change and their needs evolve in this time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we've had a lot of individuals call us with emergency issues, meaning that they needed to make a change now. And they had no SOPs or policies or procedures to back that change. And so there was things being done that had to be done, and there was no thought process behind it. So there was definitely that being the biggest challenge and the most questions, and of course the collaborations that came in through that. And really determining how do you continue your research during this time, and when do you make the determination to not move forward? And so there's studies that were easily stopped because they weren't. There were phase 1 studies and things like that could be stopped. But then you had studies that couldn't be stopped. You have oncology trials, and you have these things that you just can't stop. You have to find innovative ways to continue those in doing those research and pushing that patient forward, especially if they were seeing positive results on some of these studies. And so we have definitely seen changes, easy changes come through. We've seen more difficult, things as well. One of the things that I think that we've really tried to do as an IRB, and I can speak for most IRBs, I'm not going to say contact your IRB, definitely, if you plan on doing anything, making any significant changes to your plans. But one thing that we did was we stepped back to say, if you need to make minor deviations that don't affect subject safety, then do them. You don't need to get the IRB's approval. Of course, you have to document them in your deviation log, and of course, you have to do your proper documentation in your files. But as far as IRB review goes, we didn't want to see deviations that didn't affect subject safety. We didn't want to be that added burden to the researchers during this time when they're just trying to do the right thing for the subjects. And so at first we were just putting out fires, and now we've come to the point where, okay, now this is somewhat the norm. And so where do we now go? Okay, so now we need to be looking at what kind of systems are out there to use to make this process easier. What kind of Part 11 compliance systems are out there to use? People were doing things all over the place with all kinds of different technology. And now I think it's important that we look to ensure that they're using compliance systems. We make sure that if they are doing some type of decentralized process, whether that be skilled home visits or telemedicine practices, and what that looks like, and ensuring subject safety and all those things. So yeah, definitely has been very challenging last few months.
It's interesting you mentioned those as sort of principal concerns. Are sort of new technology proposals a big part of the incoming requests you're receiving? And what role and how active is IntegReview in actually helping to evaluate how those technology providers are set up?
Sure. Anytime that to be completely honest, when it comes to IRBs, what are we focused on the most? And it's not just about, it's about the whole study and ensuring risk benefits and all those appropriate assessment. But it really, when it comes down to it, it's all about the informed consent document, right?
Mm.
And it's and so we really want to make sure that subjects are making an informed decision. And in doing that, and ensuring that, we look to say, if you're using an electronic system, what type of system, and we want this privacy and security of those systems. And so those are things that the IRB is requiring when you're using these types of platforms to do your research. So that's we don't ask for the specs and for all the background details, but we do want an overview to ensure that that the patient's confidentiality is protected and the privacy is maintained.
Okay, so you mentioned informed consent as a really leading concern when going to remote study designs. That includes virtual, that includes decentralized. Are there other big risks, and what do you think are the most critical things to be looking out for as sponsors adapt these methods?
Sure. I think it's determining what procedures can be done in a decentralized method. That's a huge thing. And what type of expertise does that person need that's going to be involved in that portion of the trial, or in that of the investigative, the subject's participation. And what I mean by that is are they on the delegation log to do those procedures? You can't just have anyone do and then provide notes back to the investigator. And
are you referring to sort of new types of providers, so home health providers, telemedicine providers? Is that what you're thinking about?
Absolutely, yes. Making sure that they're trained and qualified, and that there's a process for them to be included in the research plan itself, and making sure that those have been selected by the investigator and have the training and capabilities of performing those different procedures that they're going to be doing with the subjects.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Can you tell us a little bit more about the remote informed consent? I think that,
Sure.
What are the biggest things to be looking out for there, especially as, a lot of these are reconsents, a lot of these are study changes that need to be taking place quite quickly. What are the biggest considerations, the best advice you can give on that front?
Sure. I think that making sure that that there's not just a consent, but a process. Making sure that e-consent doesn't take place of the process of informed consent, of making sure that the subject understands. And that just means that the engagement is still there. It's so important. Just the informed consent document is just a piece of that important conversation that has to take place to ensure that the subject understands, that all their questions have been answered. And really, when you're looking at the actual process of remote consent, it's keeping that process, and what I'm talking, not the process, but keeping the act of the technology of the EIC process simple, because there are a lot of people, especially if you're dealing with an elderly population. Children's population, which I tell you, children can probably do these things more than the elderly can. They probably have no problem figuring out difficult systems, if you want to be honest. But really looking at your audience, making sure that that there is an interactive process, that your e-signatures are all HIPAA compliant, that you're really targeting in on that, on what those important aspects are when you're deciding whether or not the platform that you're going to use is going to work for your research. And not just maybe for your research now, but for all the types of research that you do, and really look so that you can decide what platform will work for all of your studies.
So how does the IRB help as sponsors are asking a lot of these questions? So, there's a lot of considerations there. Is my remote consent going to be suitable for my population? Have I sufficiently thought about elderly population? As we're starting to ask these questions, what is the best way to use an IRB like IntegReview to get some validation in advance and make sure that it's not just a submission and response relationship, that there's actually some support for going in the right direction?
Absolutely. As with anything, the earlier you engage, the better. IRBs have really not been as involved with some of the sponsors in discussion phase of starting new technologies. But I think in these day and ages, it's just so important to have that conversation early and just make sure that that there are no major major red flags that we have to address before they engage in a system that may not be the best. There may be other things out there that can be suggested, or just really making sure that they're choosing a system that has the security that is needed for, especially when collecting electronic signatures.
Got it. And there's different types of validation too. I mean, there's validation regarding sort of the safety. There's validation regarding, is my system secure enough? But then there's also regulatory aspects. Does this meet the FDA requirements for remote informed consents, which is particularly relevant as, there's new guidance and there's new recommendations about how to proceed. So how should we be thinking about getting validation from the IRB as well as from regulators? And does IntegReview help with some of the regulatory guidance as well?
Sure. Whenever going back to your first question, we don't, as an IRB, we like to stay on the other side of, we are here for the subjects,
Yeah.
And we really do depend on the sponsors to make those decisions. We're more than willing to engage with them, and we're happy to do so, and we love to do that. The fact is that they simply don't usually come to us ahead of time. And that's fine, as long as they're doing their due diligence and ensuring that all of those regulatory frameworks are being looked at and confirmed before they choose a program. We're really not here. We stay out of that business of telling you which platforms to use. When you choose a platform, we just want to make sure that it's appropriate, that it's part 11 compliant. We're going to ask those questions in your submission to the IRB.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to look out for when you're doing remote informed consent, when you're working with mobile providers, all of some of the virtual and decentralized research methods. Have you seen anything that didn't work out particularly well, anywhere where there were challenges? And is there any way that could have been addressed by maybe engaging your team earlier, or by learning some lessons from some of your past experiences?
Sure, absolutely. I think that the only real major hiccup that I was involved in was there was a study that came across that was presented in a decentralized manner. And there's so many different, when I say decentralized, that means so many different things. It could be very small to just the informed consent process, to telemedicine, to home health, to having more of a multi-site model submitted as a single site. In this case, that was kind of what it was, is it was a multi-center study, but they didn't have enough local oversight and safety built into the plan. And so unfortunately we weren't, and we didn't disapprove the research, but we did table it, and we required them to submit as a multi-center study instead of a single center study. And that was definitely something that moving, you can't move to a you can't decentralize. There's lines there's barriers to that. There's licensing rules. There's all kinds of things that you have to consider. And so, so really looking at your project and seeing, okay, how decentralized can we make this? Because there's so many different levels of decentralizing a study.
The oversight is actually very interesting. There's principal investigator oversight. There's obviously oversight with respect to the clinical research monitors. What have you seen that is working and isn't working with respect to oversight and some of the submissions that have come your way?
Sure. I know that in some of the platforms, there's been some, with informed consent platforms anyways, there have been sometimes where revisions can be done instead of having to review the entire consent. They're almost like mini one-page addendums that just could be signed off on the change. And I think that that's a great aspect to the informed consent and in enhancing that process, because when you're looking at the whole informed consent again, and you just needed to know about this one change, I think it just makes it much easier. They of course have a copy of the full informed consent, but they're able to sign off on that change, and then it kind of solidifies that was the only change made to the informed consent, because that has been approved by the IRB as the modification. And I think that that's a really innovative way of reconsenting, and I think that's something that this technology brings. That's one thing that I've seen that works. The other thing that I see that works a lot of times is just the telemedicine. I mean, you've got to think, some people would not be involved in clinical research at all if it wasn't for these platforms. They're not going to drive 2 hours to the clinic, several times a month, when those are just for assessments that can be done through telemedicine. So absolutely, it's just, there's so many different positive things about it. It's just making sure that you're not, it's all about the risk. It's all about, is this still safe to do? Is this safe to do for the subject? And as long as it is, then IntegReview and again, the IRB is always going to support that, because we want research. If you look at the statistics, I was reading, they say that, sorry, I wrote all this down. I'm not good with repeating numbers, so I didn't want to get this incorrect. But what they say is that 85% of clinical trials fail to recruit enough patients, and 80% are delayed due to recruitment problems and dropout rates.
Wow.
So, when you're looking at when you're looking at this, it's just astounding. One of our oncology consultants that we use, she was saying, when you look at how far advanced children's cancer is compared to adult, on cancers, that we're so more advanced in children's cancers because the parents are willing to do whatever it takes, and that's to put their child in the clinical research study. They're going to do whatever it takes. But when it comes to like themselves, they're more apprehensive to do so. So that's why recruitment super high for children, and things are coming along further for the children because they're able to have enough patients. They're able to get to their recruitment. They're able to succeed in getting in those numbers and being able to prove efficacy. Whereas, if the enrollments are down, then these studies, we're doing them for no reason. We're not going to be able to take it anywhere. If we don't have the participants, then we don't have a study. So we need people to participate. We need people to participate in good research so that we can find cures for these diseases, these rare diseases, diabetes, cancer. There's so many things out there, and together, and with these new methods and these new platforms, and of course, COVID-19 has changed a lot of stuff for a lot of people, and it's almost like we knew that this change was coming, but now it's just slammed right here, right in our faces, and it's time to make that change. But I think in all, it's going to be a really positive one. And it's kind of hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I do think that there is some really good positive things that will come out of this, and we may see that this just enhances not only just bringing the research to the subject instead of the subject coming to the research. Like, we've got to find ways to get the research to the subjects. And when you're dealing with elderly population, people who are in poverty, they don't have transportation, all of these things take that away. So again, this is another piece of that decentralization. Again, I'm not saying for all decentralized trials. I know there's so many different levels, but I'm talking about the piece that has the home skilled nursing. I'm talking about you can come and do your infusions. Those things are just so beneficial to not only, and so of course we're all about the subject. So we are all for it. We are all for decentralization. We want to do what we can to move research forward and do our best in protecting the subjects at the same time. So that's our utmost goal.
As an organization, have you been involved in decentralized research before COVID-19, and do you have sort of an organizational view of where you see it having the most opportunity?
Sure. Yeah, and to be completely honest with you, when I first when a client first came to me, it was with a study where they were doing a lot more than I had seen, and I had to step back from it. I was like, whoa, this you cannot do this. This is completely not acceptable. And I just was, my regulatory, all of the things that I had knew for a fact, and was confident on, it threw everything for a loop. And then I had to then I started looking at, okay, what is this? And then I started reading more about it. And then I have more of a comfortability with it now. But I would say months back, and so it's kind of a good thing that this all happened again, because it even brought me to realize, like, okay, how important is this? And really looking into it more and finding out more, instead of just thinking of all the negatives, instead of really looking at this, how positive this could be. And so that was just part of my experiences, and looking in, and again, we have a couple of consumer type research projects where they mail the product once the subject signs consent virtually. So there really is nobody, so they can reach subjects that are in different areas. Those are, like I said, those are the ones that I've been able to see the benefit, and they're just getting numbers of participants, so they're able to reach their goals, and that's really important. Otherwise, we're reviewing research that doesn't go anywhere. So
yeah, if you're not enrolling patients, then nothing else particularly follows from that, and you won't be able to get the data that you need, and nobody gets their product to market. So that makes an incredible amount of sense, reaching so many more patients in a way that's actually better for them as participants. One thing that comes to mind, though, is the patient-investigator relationship. So you take an example of a study like that where there's a telemedicine-based enrollment. There's a lot of use of applications for the patient to do aspects of their participation. They're shipped the product. How do you preserve a patient-investigator relationship in that case? And obviously, it's squarely at the front of good clinical practice that that investigator must be able to maintain their connection with the patient, ensure their well-being, ensure their rights are upheld. How do you do that in a study that is in that full virtual model that you were just talking about?
Absolutely. So we really want to know that the investigator is engaged. That is key. They have to be, even if they're not the one consenting, they need to be engaged. Even if they're not the one that's doing they need to be following them. They need to be ensuring that this person is eligible for this trial, that they're a good fit. They have to, when they sign that 1572 document, if it's a drug study, that they are taking ownership of that study, and that's it's an absolute necessity that their involvement. Now, it does not, and for different studies, that means different things. If it's a non-investigational product and you're doing a survey research, or there's different levels of what that involvement looks like, and so again, it's having that delegation log, but ensuring that you're delegating the right individuals, and that you understand that it's still your responsibility, and you're over those subjects. You are in charge of those subjects, and you need to. And definitely, if it's a patient, if it's a study like an oncology study where there is truly an investigator-subject relationship, then you really have to have a method to keep that connection to the investigator. So there's two different things. There's some studies where they can kind of be in the back burner, ensuring everything is going appropriately, analyzing things, ensuring all the safety data and things like that are done. But then there's the other side of this where they have to stay engaged. So there's kind of two parts, unfortunately. And this is the world we live in, is unfortunately there's gray in everything.
Yes.
So there's always an answer, and then there's an answer for a different type of research. So I hate not to be able to provide you with black and white, but definitely and that's the reason why these conversations like the one we're having now are just so important, because it's not just it's not one size fits all. It's a conversation that has to take place to make sure that it fits for your research. So, and there's we do minimal risk, we do exempt research, minimal risk research, all the way up to you know, first in man. So it's just, you know, it's something that we definitely, there's different things that fit for different trials.
Got it. On the studies that do involve telemedicine and where telemedicine is, and I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would be guessing you're getting a lot more telemedicine related submissions. Yeah, so for studies that do involve that, are there specific recommendations you can give? I can think of a lot of different possible challenges that would emerge in a study where telemedicine does take the place of in-person visits and assessments. Patients might be less forthcoming about certain aspects of how they're feeling or how they're doing. Physical exam becomes more difficult. We obviously at CureBase use telemedicine extensively and we see the opportunity there, but I'd be curious to know what your recommendations are with respect to making sure those are as equal quality or greater than an in-person assessment.
Sure. You know, that's one thing is you're right. You know, somebody that's may not be feeling as well, may not be as forthcoming, especially if it's not with the investigator and they're speaking with somebody else just to do like a side effect check or, you know, a well check over telemedicine. But it's important to remind them that every small change in their health, positive or negative, needs to be disclosed. So I think that reiteration during all communications is important. And I think it's just important that that the telemedicine visit is just as engaging as an on-site visit is. So it's not just you're popping on and then you're just you're doing your assessment and popping out. It's like, no, I think that the good thing about telemedicine is they have a little more time to spend with the patient, I think.
Absolutely.
Even talking about telemedicine in regular practice. I know there's been times where the investigator or your own doctor is so behind in his day-to-day activities that he pops in and out real quick, 5 minutes, and you're like, what? And I think what's they know that they actually spend more time with you sometimes. I'm like, wow, I haven't talked to one of my regular doctors like this in forever, because they're usually so fast to go in and treat you and run out. And it's like with telemedicine, they tend to spend a little more time with you. So I'm hoping that that's the case, and we can transfer that to the clinical world as well.
And you can also give patients more resources that they have time to read in advance, electronic resources, video content. The patients have more time as well, and a feeling of the ability to go at their own speed.
Oh yeah, those are all wonderful. I mean, it's all about education, and the more we educate them and give them the advance notice before even informed consent or any of those things, just informing them of what a clinical research study is. I mean, all of those educational things that are now in the mainstream are they're so important. It's the only way. I mean, technology is the way. Obviously, look at us now on the Zoom call.
On the Zoom call.
Yeah, absolutely. We do Zoom meetings have become a thing. Like this big conference room behind me here, empty. Where typically, we would be all together. It's definitely the way of the future, and in order to continue to be able to conduct clinical research studies, we have to start looking at different telemedicine, home health practices, all of these things to not only reduce the spread of COVID during now, but for future, for other reasons. There's so many other reasons, and looking at does it fit? Is it going to not just during these unprecedented times? Is it going to work for your research going forward? And the other thing, when you talked about sponsors and protocols, one of the things that I've really encouraged lately was to give an option in the protocol, not to be so black and white when it comes to visits.
Yes.
Don't say this one's going to be in-house and this one's going to be virtual. Say there may be, the following visits may take place virtually because you may have situations where, the course of your research changes, and leaving that, I think that as long as you've stated that they may take place via telemed, the IRB is going to have an opportunity to say yes or no. But if you don't end up doing that visit telemedicine and they actually come in, there's no...
Because it's a deviation at that point.
Yeah. So they've got to build some flexibility in their protocols. I think it's really, really important to build that flexibility. In addition to that, sites that have if it's a multi-center study, there may be sites that have the capability to do remote visits. There may be sites that don't have the capability of doing remote visits. There may be sites that don't have the resources to be able to do the home health services and things like that. So I think building that into protocol so that some sites can act in that manner, and some sites that don't have the ability. I think that's so important for sponsors to start looking at ways to be innovative when they develop these studies and say, we'll allow these to be these can be done telemedicine, whether the site does it or not and has the capabilities. We don't want to exclude that investigator, but put those in design those with that thought process behind it, because I think it's like I said, with single sites, it's been kind of an easy modification for a lot of these investigators who have changed their visits. And I'm really honest with them. I said, do a protocol do a protocol memo right now, because you don't need to change the protocol. Do a memo that says, these visits may now be conducted via telemedicine, and that when you change it back, you're not deviating from the protocol. Again, you're not having to resubmit to the IRB again to tell us, oh no, we're not going to be doing that anymore. It's
make it something that's optional. And that can be better for the patients as well as the sites. I think our experience has been that some sites, for reasons of COVID and otherwise, they prefer virtual. They actually are very comfortable with telemedicine. Others, they actually like to have the patients come in, but sometimes the patients prefer to come in as well. I think it's really about giving more options to the folks involved. Sometimes patients actually prefer that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then you don't have to, if you don't write it so rigidly, then it's so much better. And even in the informed consent document, we do the same thing. These visits may take place, virtual, but we don't have to state that they have to, So you
obviously are very collaborative with sponsors, giving them that type of input, preserving the flexibility and the ability to issue those memos and sort of simplify the process of, rapidly adapting to incorporate telemedicine, incorporate home visits, operating this time. I'll ask perhaps a tougher question, which is there's many, many IRBs out there. And, every clinical sponsor has a IRB that they work with, or many. Are there ways in which IRBs can present challenges to some companies as they attempt to adopt virtual or decentralized designs? And how does IntegReview stand out in terms of how you support clients in that way?
Yeah, I think as far as what we've done, we've put out guide. We were evolving in our guidances. Obviously, the FDA, to be on, in all my years, which has been a long time. I've been actually in clinical research for over 20 years. But in all of my time in research, we have been begging. We beg for guidances from the FDA, but I think they have done an outstanding job in providing tons of information during this time. So I applaud them for getting things out to us so quickly. Again, they've provided us enough information to where we can ensure that we share that information with our clients. They're even allowing, I know they have the new, I'm sorry, I don't recall them. There's a new platform that they're allowing for informed consent processes. And I think that's again, it's amazing how quickly they're coming in together and providing us guidance. And then what we do on our end is just, if there's something that works for somebody, share it. You know what I mean? Get it out there, put it, just the more we share during this time, the more we learn. And I wish there was all the IRBs would get together and just do the same thing. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. There's too many institutions. There's hospital, local IRBs. And then you've got, your big players that aren't willing to collaborate because they're so to their organizations. But I think we're all learning from each other regardless. And I think there is some real collaborations going on even between IRBs, and we're to discuss, our processes. When we do reliance agreements with other IRBs, a lot of those IRBs have reached out with us because they're developing practices and they want to make sure that they're in line with what we're allowing. And so I think that it's really brought the research community together in a lot of really amazing ways. And I just think that from here, we can only go up. So, so here we are in this day and time, and have a lot to look forward to, and we have a lot of challenges ahead of us. But I think that I would encourage sites to really look at their processes, to start. Whenever this first happened, everybody was just doing things and documenting it. Now it's time to bring all those experiences in and start developing SOPs, start developing those processes, start looking for platforms that work for your organization, ensure they're Part 11 compliant. Look for those, look for what works for your organization, and start developing SOPs, because it's been pretty lenient lately.
I see.
But we all have a job to do, and we all need to start really looking at it now. We've had to just go through the fire, and now we need to start planning for our future, and making sure that we have outlined processes in place, and that we're following our internal SOPs. So I think that that's really important for research sites to begin to choose platforms and develop SOPs around those platforms.
Wow. And where do you see IntegReview's unique role in that future?
I think that just again, supporting the practice. It's funny when we're talking, and I just remember our client services team, Sarah, which Sarah Atwood, she came to me talking to me about decentralized studies, and this has been when it kind of first came along, and I was like, what? We're barely doing that in the medical field right now, in the normal medical field, not the investigational aspect of it. I was like, what are they thinking? And I'll be honest, I was the biggest critic. I really was. Mm. But again, I think that with knowledge and understanding, and hopefully the FDA is going to come out with that guidance that they promised us in 2020. I know they've gotten sidetracked a little with COVID. I know that they're going to be coming out with some guidance documents that will hopefully push this even more further, and give us enough regulatory framework so that not only right now we can just educate and guide as we've seen from experience, right? From ensuring that you're still within the regulatory framework that we have now. But it's really going to be nice to get some of that guidance out there, and then we'll be able to develop and perfect some of our own SOPs so that we'll have more guidance for our investigators and sponsors and researchers alike. Yeah. That's
amazing. Well, one last thing we can chat about. You mentioned earlier some of the more complex studies in oncology area, studies where it may be difficult to resume them. Perhaps not all of the visits or assessments can be done through telemedicine or through use of home health providers. What advice would you give to a company in that position, or a research sponsor in that position? They have a multi-site in a more complex therapeutic area, and they're looking for a way to, in a safe way, continue their research, embrace the many, many different forms of decentralization. And at CureBase, this is a big part of what we believe. We think that decentralized research is a lot bigger than at home. It's not just telemedicine and blood draw. It also means community providers. It means use of new healthcare settings like urgent care, commercial pharmacy. What advice would you give to a company that's in that position where they feel a little stuck and they're looking for a way to embrace decentralization and virtualized trials to continue thriving?
Yeah, it's to look at all options. Don't give up. Look at all options, because those research studies are the most important research that we review, and just continue to look for those innovative ways. And I think that, as IntegReview, we're so, how do you say, we just want to collaborate. We really do. We don't want to, we're not no people. You know what I mean? Yes, we can, but let's see how we can do it in an ethical following regulatory framework, like let's build it together. So I think it's just a matter of, in those really difficult situations, it's collaborating with people like Curebase, making sure that, seeing what others are doing and what works for them, and then sharing those experiences and developing something that works for them. So I'm very thankful for companies like yours. I don't have the technology background that I'm sure that you all do, but just making sure that, again, subject safety should just be in mind for everything that we do. But at the same time so in doing that, it's people that are actually having positive experiences. How do you keep them? What do you do? And I know that there's a lot of different things that they can do. It seems like restrictions are getting a little more lenient. But I think that they're going to come back and be strict again. We're seeing more cases. And so unfortunately, I think we're going to end up being more restrictive than less before. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And so although we could say, well, go ahead and have them come in and do you practice your self-distancing and your, no more than so many people in your clinic at a time and all those things that we've been trying to do. But when you're looking at it in a long term, those things may only work for a little bit because we may get more restrictive again. So it's really going to take some collaborative efforts amongst all players to keep clinical research going. Absolutely. And so thankful for the decentralized model. It's almost like it came as, in the most perfect timing ever. Because like I said, being that skeptical person that I was, and here we are using it and what we're leaning on to be able to do it. It's just been phenomenal.
Well, I think a balance of skepticism and positivity is the right solution. And certainly there could be a second wave and it's just waiting. If you have a significant multi-site study right now, waiting for that to resume in the traditional fashion is a very risky proposition. So I think we need a balance right now. I think folks do need to be creative and they do need to embrace decentralization and virtualization, even for more complex studies to survive in the COVID-19 era. But also you're right when you say that the future is going to be, the rules are going to change as well. There'll be a formal guidance, some of the leniency around how these studies are operated, how SOPs are written, those will need to improve as well. So I think that being creative now, embracing the model, but also preparing for the future and working on strengthening our own organizations to really be regulatory compliant and safe for patients with an eye on the long term of decentralized research is the right approach. And I can say that IntegReview is a very good collaborative partner. I do believe that you're going to be a big part of the future. And certainly we've had a great experience collaborating and we'll continue to do so. So thank you, Melanie. I'm happy to end the interview here and really thank you for sharing your perspective from the IRB at a really, really important time for clinical research. So thank you.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay. I will I'll stop recording, but I'm not going to hang up right away.